Thanks very much, Eric, and thanks everybody for having me here, especially the Ad Club and the Lantern Club of Boston. It's true, my time at Ad Age is actually not that long in the scale of things. In a lifetime of the magazine industry, coming up on 40 years is really a blink of an eye. But it has been a very eventful 4 years, and I think there's a lot to talk about, even if you start from that arbitrary place in time. Around the time I started, Time Inc., for example, had about 12,000 employees. Now, 1,000 of those were the book division, which they sold off. But even so, 11,000. We're now down to about 9,600. Now, that involves selling 18 magazines, which I think at one point would have been unimaginable. Shutting down a magazine called Teen People, which was a really big deal once upon a time. Closing the Life newspaper supplement, and making a lot of other moves, and of course, round after round of layoffs. At the same time, you could look at Condé Nast, a company that didn't used to have budgets at all. You know, they just spent. It was unbelievable. They started to rationalize a little bit under Steve Florio and then under Chuck Townsend. But only now, under the press of the recession, have they started cutting budgets. And there's more to come. There's more going on this week. In fact, Richard Beckman's media group, which takes credit for 80% of the revenue that flows through the company, although don't ask the individual publishers about that. They don't really like the way that's presented. This group is 135 people. It's going to have a lot fewer, I think, by the end of this week or next. There just isn't enough for them to do in this environment, and everyone's figuring out how to operate more leanly. And for a company like Condé Nast to think like that, I think is really telling. You know, we're really in something here. But before I go on into how this is going to change everything, and nothing's the same, and we've never seen anything like this, I think it's probably worth going back and looking briefly at 1991, maybe 2001. Kathy Black from Hearst actually took us to task a little bit. She wrote an op-ed in Ad Age, quoted our own words against us. She found an article from 1991 in which we said this recession is going to change everything. Nothing's ever going to be the same again. Which is a lot like what we're writing these days, and I think it's a lot like what we wrote in 2001 too. And after each of those recessions, there really were great times for magazines ahead. There were booms. There was a lot of money made, and there's going to be a lot of money made after this recession ends too. But I will say, I think this one's different. I think things are going to be different once the recession lifts. The effects of changes we've seen are probably going to persist in a lot of cases. Not in all cases, but to go back to those Time Inc. jobs. Those hundreds, 1,000 plus Time Inc. magazine jobs that got eliminated, those are not coming back in that form. There's going to be hiring, and they are hiring on the digital side, of course. But there's restructuring going on. There's an attempt to find a new way to work efficiently and to concentrate your priorities where the growth is. At a company like Time Inc., that matters a lot, partly because Time Warner shareholders really want to see growth. That's what it's all about. And so yes, the worst pinch today is cyclical. This shall pass. We had a first quarter where the monthlies aggregated fell 22%, which is not good, especially considering how deeply discounted many of those pages were. That's the recession at work. That is not, I don't think, secular, digital media transformation kind of play at work. That's an awful economy across all sectors. But we are going to see, as I said, the effects and some of the changes we see during the recession persist. I think a really good example is the kind of commentary that Jeff Bewkes, who's taken over Time Warner, the kind of comments he makes when people ask him about Time Inc. Analysts ask him on every conference call, so what are you going to do about Time Inc.? Is it going to grow again? Are you guys going to keep it? And since the beginning of 2008, he's been saying, visibility is too poor, we can't decide. And he said it again in a recent conference call. Conditions are too murky, this is no time to be making that kind of decision. And so at some point the recession will lift, and he'll have the kind of visibility he needs to make that decision. But the fact that Time Warner is considering, or looks forward to considering, whether it should somehow spin off or alter its ownership structure with Time Inc., from which the whole company started, I think is pretty remarkable. We're also going to see, I think, different kinds of magazines being launched and succeeding. There's going to be a lot fewer of the B2 magazines that followed, say, the 2001 recession. That was a time when you saw Cargo follow Lucky, Shop Etc. follow Lucky, Vitals for men, Vitals for women. A lot of magazines trying to get a piece of the one that started it all, maybe the top 2 category leaders. Hearst introduced a magazine called Weekend. It was very similar to Real Simple, had the same launch editor. They didn't in the end work out. But I don't think people are even going to make those attempts anymore. We're going to concentrate on the magazines that work. The top couple, I know advertisers are concentrating on the top couple and putting a lot of their money that they otherwise would have spent in 3 or 4 or 5 books elsewhere. And those are those alternatives that make this change, this depression, pardon me, this recession, not yet, right? This recession, I think so pivotal. We're also going to see, maybe it goes without saying, despite a great event here, a lot fewer sort of lavish events. I don't know if anyone remembers the Talk magazine launch party on Liberty Island in New York. That's not going to happen again. It's time to concentrate on what makes money, and especially in this environment, you don't want to look wrong. Style and things matter. But it reminds me that Ann Moore, Timing CEO, she was at her Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony in New York, which some of you may have attended. She and Martha Stewart were being honored. She pointed out, she was thankful. Print still works. Print advertising is still very effective. Magazine advertising is still very effective. She's not wrong. It is. There's research that shows it. We all know it anecdotally. Yesterday, my girlfriend was tearing a page out of a magazine and taking it to, these things are not going to change. She did go, I thought, a little bit too far when she said she's also thankful for not being part of the newspaper industry. I thought it was a little cold. The newspapers are in bad shape, and it's really unfortunate what's happening. But it also begs the question, are you really that separated from what's happening in the newspaper industry? Magazines are in much better shape. They're not going to go the way that newspapers are going. The physical object really plays to the strengths of magazines in a way that it doesn't for newspapers. But at the same time, yeah, you're on the printed page, and you've got all kinds of new competition coming from all directions, and you've got changing reader habits, shorter attention spans. I think it's true. I think there may be a time when we think the 140 letter limit on Twitter is really going on too long. Things are changing. But to Ann's credit, about 10% of Timing's revenue now comes from digital. People at other companies will say, well, how much of that's profit? We could do that too if we just spent all this money to build it up. And I can't answer that question. I don't know whether it's profitable, to what degree. But you do need to have a foothold in online these days. You've got to know what you can do. You've got to be able to support your print products that way. So all of this is a long way to say there's plenty of work to do. And there's a lot of questions to answer, which is why we're all here today. I would say, though, already there's good news. There's already things that we should be holding up high. Plenty of unrealized potential. Plenty of steps left to take. For instance, magazines can do better online. I think it's safe to say. There's too many subscription offers, not enough emphasis on content on a lot of these magazine websites. I don't want to put down selling subscriptions online. It's a great source. You get the credit cards. It's really efficient, and direct mail is getting more and more expensive and less efficient. So let's not knock it. But at the same time, what do magazines have that others don't have? You've got great content, and you've got your brand. And you should really be pushing that content and using it however you can to make the most of the experience wherever readers find you. I really think that many companies have failed so far to fully capitalize on their brands. And not to pick on Condé, but who's been at this? They had Condé Nast since 96, 98. They've been at this for a while. But they made a couple of decisions early on that I think in retrospect I might question. They decided that magazine websites aren't ever going to have the scale that advertisers want. It's a reasonable assumption, and it's actually been borne out for the most part so far. And they also decided that they didn't want to undermine their print products, where to be fair, they get all their revenue, almost all their revenue. And that's still true today. The problem is, as a result, they started Epicurious, they started Concierge, they started Style. And so now if I search for Vogue online, Vogue, one of the most powerful brands in the world, it directs me to instyle.com/Vogue. Or not InStyle, excuse me, again, style.com, Vogue. I really feel like that's a waste of a brand. You've really got a lot of power with Vogue. Condé owns Women's Wear Daily. They're generating constant fashion news content. They could put that on Vogue and give people who care